And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Johnny.
Three Films and a Podcast has no claim of ownership on any film footage used in this episode. All film footage is owned in its entirety by the copyright holders and is used solely with the intent of film criticism, commentary, and education under fair use law. And just like every car in Too Fast, Too Furious, this podcast contains spoilers. Enjoy.
All right. Hello and welcome back to Three Films and a Podcast, the show where three friends challenge each other to broaden their cinematic horizons through a series of themed rounds. My name is Tyler Beck, coming to you from Portland, Oregon, and I'm joined, as always, by Matt Weiler in Pleasant Grove, Utah.
Ahoy, ahoy.
Hoy, hoy to you, sir. And Ben Lawhorn is also with us from Salt Lake City, Utah.
Ben isn't here. Can't do this for the whole pod.
Yes.
Hello from Salt Lake City, from me and Tony.
He couldn't commit,
Couldn't
but
do the
I
whole
appreciate
time.
the effort.
Tony.
If you're new to the show, welcome, first of all. And second, I think it's important that you know that we think of this movie as like a movie club. And it's a movie club that you are now a part of. Matt and Ben and I, we've been participating in our own little three-person club for quite a while now. When did we start doing this? I know we talk about this all the time, but...
I mean, between ourselves was the beginning of 2020 for all three of us.
Mm-hmm.
Our first
yeah.
episode was like, I think in September or something like that for Do the Right Thing. But yeah, the actual watch party started at the beginning of 2020 for the three of us.
And it was inspired by something that you had tried to do. You tried to watch 500 movies in a year or something, which is bananas. And I wanted to try and do something similar to that, but not quite that aggressive. And so anyways, we started doing this and we would text back and forth and have our own chats. And we sort of realized that we had something worthy of sharing with the masses, so to speak. So with that in mind, we started recording those conversations. And now here we are on the Spotifys, the YouTubes, or wherever else you're finding us today. And we really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us. And of course, we appreciate all of our movie club members. Now, with that movie club in mind, I want to introduce the fourth person on your screen, who is as yet anonymous. He's our special guest, one of our longest standing supporters of the podcast. He's coming to us from Salt Lake City, Utah, and his name is Justin Wong.
Hey, glad to be here. Glad to join you guys on this. This is gonna be cool. It's gonna be fun.
For sure, man. Yeah, we're super excited to have you. We were chatting before recording, and yeah, I mean, you've been with us since the beginning. You were one of the first names in the watch parties, and we really appreciate your support, and we're super excited to have you with us. And I'm interested to hear what you have to say about The Shining, a movie which I haven't seen until just now, and is one of the reasons we started to do this podcast. Well, I guess without any further ado, we can just get into today's movie. I kind of buried the lead a little bit earlier, but we're talking about the 1980 Stanley Kubrick classic starring Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. It's called The Shining. This movie marks the beginning of our Kubrick round, which is the second of our three consecutive rounds of movies by famous directors that we've somehow missed during our personal cinematic journeys. We sort of realized, it fits the theme of this podcast, really. There's a bunch of stuff that we thought we knew or thought we had seen and hadn't, or, different directors that we thought we'd had experiences with that, we probably should make sure we have these experiences. So Kubrick, for me, fell into that category, which is why I picked it. I've seen a handful of his stuff, but there were some classics like the one we're discussing tonight that I hadn't seen, and we had to rectify that. So the first of these rounds was our Hitchcock round, which was one of my favorite rounds so far. I think we've talked about that a little bit. And so far, I'm enjoying the Kubrick round equally. The Shining was a really cool experience, which is weird to say given the subject matter and the film, but I really did enjoy it. So I guess, Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about the movie, give us a brief synopsis, and maybe a little bit about your personal experience with it, like, the first time you saw it or how it, when you saw it, that sort of thing. 'Cause I get the feeling you probably saw it way before I did.
Yeah, well, quick take. The stories about this this gentleman, he takes his family to be to a hotel to be kind of the caretaker for it over the winter. He's a writer, a frustrated writer, and so
Aren't they all?
right? And yeah, so it's their experience. It's just him, his wife, and his son in this hotel over the winter, and a slow descent into to madness there. So that's kind of the quick take on that. I did watch this. I saw the movie early 90s. I was in middle school, and Stephen King was kind of the everyone was kind of reading his books, and so I remember I was at a friend's house, and he bought on pay-per-view.
Oh, rad.
Yeah, and back then, yeah.
Did he have permission? Please tell me he didn't have permission.
As his parents, because you had to make a phone call. You had to call into the cable company, and I remember watching it, and it's interesting. Kubrick's an interesting director. The Shining is a great movie, I think, because it does. You could watch it for what it is, a horror film, but you can take it, to the nth level with looking into it and dissecting it.
Yeah.
Obviously, when we're just young kids, we were just watching it because it was, related to Stephen King and horror film. And so, I'll be honest, I wasn't, at that age, I wasn't blown away by it. I thought,
Sure.
Hey, that's a good movie.
Yeah.
It had some scares in it, some good, some imagery and stuff like that. But I came to appreciate it much later.
Yeah. How many times do you think you've seen this movie throughout your?
I don't go back to it a lot. I've probably seen it, maybe 5-6 times, watched it 5-6 times.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely one that if you chose to, I think you could get yourself deep in the weeds. I know there's the documentary, which now I'll finally get to watch, Room 237, that dives into a lot of stuff. I've just heard a bunch about it. I don't know exactly what it deals with. I think maybe Ben, you've seen it too, but, yeah, you could definitely get yourself lost in the lore of this movie, which is one of my favorite things about it. Matt, I'm curious, what's been your experience with? I don't know if you've seen it before this, assignment, but I'm curious what your experience has been with this movie, because I just know, it gets referenced a lot and it gets borrowed from a lot, and you can't get away from this movie whether you've seen it or not. So yeah, I'm just curious, what was yours?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always considered myself something of a cinephile, but it wasn't until a few years back I worked with a guy who was like a true cinephile. Just made me feel like a total idiot. Like made me feel like I'd only seen like 10 movies. But he like had everything, and I remember we were both like really anticipating the Ready Player One adaptation coming out. And in that trailer, there was a reference to The Shining, and I hadn't seen The Shining yet. And so I confided in this man, and I told him that I hadn't seen it, and that I'd like to see it before the movie came out so that I could, be in on the references in that movie.
Right.
And so he did me a solid, put it under my car seat while no one was looking, and took it home, watched it, and got to enjoy it. And this was like in 2017. So I'm very late to the game as well.
Yeah.
But I watched it at least at an age where I could appreciate, the Kubrickisms.
Yeah.
Can't even say that. But yeah, so I really enjoyed some of those shots and the composition and what he like put together in that movie. It's just still insane to me. And I like some of those shots I just like want on a poster on my wall, so.
Yeah. Was it this movie, Ben, or anyone can, I just always default to Ben because he's always been my movie guy. But wasn't this the one where he built a scale model of the hotel, and he would like spend hours lighting it from different angles and taking still photographs? I had read that somewhere. I don't know if anyone else had heard anything about that. I think so.
Yeah. I mean, and the maze and stuff like that, like they built kind of like a model of that as well. So we get that super cool shot from the top of the maze.
Yeah.
I believe this is that one, but I don't know for sure. Maybe Justin knows more about that.
It wouldn't surprise me. He definitely has that attention to detail. I don't know for sure if he did build that model set, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, the guy, his worlds that he creates, I think it might be the biggest compliment I could give him is they feel very lived in and they feel very authentic, you know, like with a stark contrast to this, like this film feels a little dirty and grimy. Mainly, you know, the location has a lot to do with it, but the lighting and the subject matter. Whereas like 2001 feels like cold and shiny and sharp and, you know, it's all metallic and it just, but they both, right. And they both feel like very real, right? Like very realized, authentic location. So,
I mean, I'd say the same too for The Killing, which we watched earlier.
Yeah.
You know, one of his early films. Like I think you could show someone The Killing, The Shining in 2001. And I don't know if there's really anything about them that would tie them together if you didn't know who directed them. You know, if you just showed these to people, like, what do these have in common? Like, absolutely nothing. Like, great cinematography, stuff like that. But I don't know. I think he's he does create a lot of different worlds, and I think he's one of the directors that can like really embody something completely different every single time, which is really cool. I'm excited. Like, I picked Paths of Glory for next week's movie. A little bit of a cheat on my end because I have seen it before, but I wanted to watch it again. So we're watching that. But I mean, that's completely different. And then we'll get into Barry Lyndon, which I haven't seen before either, but it just looks like, you know, this period piece that just, I don't know. I'm really excited to see it. As far as like my experience with The Shining, I came to it rather late as well, because I know it had been on at one point at like a sleepover, but there's two genres I did not get into at all growing up, and that was anything scary and anything that was Western.
Yeah.
The Westerns was just like strictly because of my mom. She loved Westerns, and in my mind it's like, well, if she likes them, they're not cool, so I'm not watching them. And then horror movies just because like I don't like being scared. I don't know, that's not my thing.
Same.
But as I've gotten older, I've come to like really love and appreciate those genres. So I finally watched The Shining, I think just when I was in school in college, and I didn't get it by any means. There's still a lot of stuff that I'm just like, man, I don't know, you know, but I know it's like very well done. It's very meticulous, and everything is very purposeful. So, I mean, also, so it seems, you know, like watching the making of and just kind of realizing that, you know, that moment when he's inside the freezer, like pounding on the door, like before they do that shot, Kubrick just gets on the floor. He's like, I wonder what this would look like. Then that's the shot they end up using. It's one of the coolest shots of the whole movie. And it was just kind of like, I don't know, what's it look like from down here? Let's do that. And just the stark contrast, we'll get into it later, but like with Hitchcock, where every single frame is just like drawn out. We know exactly what we're doing. So it's interesting to see their different styles, which we'll talk about later on. But I definitely came into this a lot later. This is probably maybe my third or fourth viewing of the movie, something like that. Still is impactful, whether or not I like understand it. It still really hits me. I think this time I really noticed how haunting it was, like not just scary and creepy, but like, I don't know, there's just like, it gets under your skin, I think, you know, in the best way. So yeah, I loved it. I'm glad we watched it.
Yeah, same. I think getting under your skin is the perfect way to talk about this movie, because, you know, obviously this is my first time seeing it. I watched it, I think 2 days ago. Yeah, it was on Saturday. So, and as I was watching it, you know, despite having some idea of what was going to happen and what the story is about, because, you know, my only personal experience with this film has been through references. Like there's that famous Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode.
No, go easy on the wee one. His father's gonna go crazy and chop them all into haggis.
What's haggis?
Boy, you read my thoughts. You've got the shinin.
You mean shining.
Shh, you wanna get sued?
They knock this off. And that was literally the most of The Shining I had seen, besides, you know, I knew the Here's Johnny thing. I had seen clips of him swinging the axe. I've seen certain different things. I've heard quotes, all that stuff. But as I was watching it, not to say that I wasn't enjoying it, but like, and not to say that it wasn't living up to my expectation, but there was sort of a little bit of like, maybe just because of the secondhand exposure I've had to it, where like, it's not that I wasn't impressed, but it just was kind of like, it almost felt like almost like a line from the movie itself, where like I knew what was coming around every corner, right? Like I was having I had my own shine for The Shining, so to speak. And so as I was watching, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is kind of what I'd expected. And like you, Ben, I'm not a huge fan of horror films. I've toughened up somewhat, but like not a huge fan of them. So, but this one wasn't really scaring me. It was creepy, and I recognized that. But as far as like the actual terror, I didn't really feel it. So when it was first over, I was like, well, did I like that as much as I thought I would? But then I realized like over the rest of the night, I was like, I wanted to watch it again. You know what I mean? Like, so to say that it got under your skin or under my skin is a perfect way to represent it for me, because I want to watch this thing again. Like I've been sort of not obsessed with it, but just like I've thought about it since it ended, and I'm like, well, that's a perfect movie. Like I mean, I have no way to like critically think about this movie other than like I haven't stopped thinking about it. And I remember I ran into my neighbor after I watched it, and I was like proud to have told him like, dude, I finally just saw The Shining. And he's a bit older than me. And so we were talking about it out in the front yard, and I was just like, I don't know. It felt like a cinematic moment for me. And I get why it's had the hype that it has, because, you know, we are, what's the math here? 30 something years later. Should be way easier for me to do this math.
41 years later?
Yeah. I was like, I'm 37, and this is I could have done that way easier, but yeah, I don't know. It just I'm really glad that I finally got around to it. So again, shouts to the movie club for helping me do this. So we got to talk about Jack. We got to talk about a few things and a couple of different performances, but first I want to talk about Jack. I mean, I feel like for me personally, this is like the Jack Nicholson role. Like, if and when we do Nicholson Rushmore, which I actually meant to put on the sheet here, and we can try to do it on the fly, or we can do it as a post later, I guess. But I don't know. I just there's a few different performances in here which I truly loved, and I just felt like we had to talk about Jack first, because, you know, I put in my Letterboxd review that like he was able to get himself to a place mentally that like I truly hope I never have the occasion or reason to visit personally. It was really, really great performance. I think it was Justin, you mentioned that it's a really slow burn. It's a real slow descent into madness, but it seems like a constant descent, right? Like it doesn't seem like it falls off a cliff and all of a sudden he's crazy. Like you can kind of track the progression as he gets a little loopier and a little crazier. And I don't know, like I was just struck by it. I don't know, did he win awards for this, or I should have been a little bit more prepared here, but seems like he should have won an award for this.
I would think so. Let's see.
Nothing like some dead airspace on a podcast, but I don't know. I think you're looking that up, Ben. But anyways,
all the listeners look that up real quick.
Yeah. Email us 3filmspod@gmail.com. Like and subscribe. Well, 5 stars on Apple.
That is an interesting point to bring up, because I think, you know, Kubrick's films are notoriously, like, I don't think any of his actors really won awards, and I think you guys alluded, you'll talk about that later, his relationship with his actors. But I think for the most part, you know, maybe how clinical his approach was with them, you don't see a lot of the actors, the stars of his films getting a lot of accolades. It's more of like, it's a Kubrick film and they're a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that's
interesting.
That's a good point, but I mean, I don't know. Jack, I think he might be legitimately crazy.
Stay away from me. Please. Don't hurt me.
I'm not gonna hurt you.
Stay away from me.
Wendy.
Stay away.
Darling, light of my life. I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash them right the fuck in.
Like, there's a part where I'm like, I don't think he's acting, and I assume he is. I don't know him personally, other than seeing him on the sidelines of Laker games and in movies and stuff. But I don't know, man. It struck me, and I would be surprised if he didn't win something. But
well, he was not even nominated for a BAFTA, a Golden Globe, or an Oscar for this performance.
Well, my Oscar goes to Jack Nicholson, 1980. I don't know what he was up against, but
we'll have to fix the Oscars in 1981.
Yeah. Ben, what do you think about Jack Nicholson here?
Yes.
Agreed.
I agree with you. I got thinking about Rushmore too. And yeah, it might be fun to do as a poster on the fly. I was worried it was just like, we're all just going to pick, this and Chinatown and Departed. It would just be, all four the same, but I'd be kind of curious to hear
Jacks.
Yeah, exactly. But I think he was great in this. It was interesting reading about it that Stephen King did not want him at all because he had played kind of mentally unstable people beforehand. And apparently in the book, both he and Jack and Wendy are super normal people going into it, and then they lose their minds. Whereas Stephen King just felt like once you see Jack Nicholson on screen, you're like, oh, this guy's already kind of lost it. Yeah. And I don't think he was wrong. Like he's like kind of in that interview and whatever. I'm like, oh, this guy's like maybe kind of losing it already.
Seems a little unhinged for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so like it seems like staying at the hotel just kind of like pushes him even more rather than like creating the craziness. So
that's fair.
I totally see his point in that. I think one of the people he wanted was John Voight, which was like, that's weird to me. But yeah, this is a quintessential Jack performance. I can't imagine him not doing this now. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know who I would even think of replacing him with. He was, very strong, very intimidating. And yeah, it was just, I think it's a masterful performance into like derangement, and you put it best. I think just it's a slow burn, like Justin said, like it's just, it carries all the way throughout until those last scenes, going through the maze, dragging his foot through the snow. Like, yeah, this guy has completely lost his mind, and that's awesome. He did such a good job. I think it was great.
Yeah, for sure. How about you, Matt? What do you think?
I was going to bring up the same thing that Ben brought up. Stephen King's critique of him. The second he's in that job interview, you're like, this guy's not normal.
Yeah.
Even like his face acting. Yeah. His face acting. Like you said, Tyler, like, is he acting? Like, this is just Jack Nicholson's face.
Right.
And his mannerisms just already communicated that this guy by the end of this movie is going to be insane. And I don't really have a problem with that. I didn't read the book. And so I had no personal investment in this. And we'll talk about that later. Adaptations and whether they should be the same or why people hold them together. But I liked Jack in this role just because even though like he's kind of been that character in every movie since in some way or another.
He's kind of always just Jack Nicholson, right?
He's one of those actors where you know what you're getting. But
this could be a Joker origin story. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like,
it really could be.
This could be that thing. Yeah,
it'd be better than Joker.
Yeah, they could literally put makeup on him, call this Joker, and have this be the original one. But he's also like one of those actors where you typecast him for this because you know that he'll just do it perfectly. And so that the scene where, let's see, I can't remember exactly what part it is, but he's got stubble, and I think his wife and Danny are out in the maze, and he's got that weird like look, just
the
like
Kubrick stare, just like slow push in on him. Yeah,
it's like I am going crazy looking at him.
Yeah, the man can play crazy.
Yeah, so I'm all for his performance here. It's interesting what you pointed out, Justin, that like none of them really won accolades for their acting. It is very much like people just fit into a Kubrick movie, and that's the star of the movie, is that it's a Kubrick movie. So, but needless to say, his performance was great. Shelley Duvall was great. I guess we'll talk about her in a second. But I loved it.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick, De Niro won for Raging Bull that year, which is that's a head-to-head knockout fight, so to speak. But still, I think he could have taken some of these spots of the other nominees in there. But it's hard to argue with De Niro, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, I'll let De Niro have it.
Just this one.
Before we move on to our next the next topic. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about Jack there, Justin?
Well, it's interesting, and especially when you have an actor with that, that body work, and we have the benefit of hindsight,
sure.
A lot of times looking back at it, but you see it in some actors, you see, I think that for me, The Shining, when I look at that, that's like on the cusp of, Jack doing his Jack thing, when you kind of watch the movie and you see, I've seen that with like Al Pacino. You look at some like Jack Nicholson's early films, like Five Easy Pieces, Easy Rider.
Yeah, Easy Rider.
It's a lot different style. And then they kind of, I'm sure he's encouraged by directors or by box office or by whatever to say, hey, this is kind of your thing. This is what people come to you. And so I think you start seeing some beginnings of that in the Shining, kind of that style that he's kind of adapted, like, Al Pacino's done as well. Daniel Day-Lewis has kind of fallen into that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
That might be blasphemy, but it's, you kind of start seeing those trends. And I think that's where at least for me, when I look at his body work, Jack Nicholson's, when I see The Shining, I kind of see him keying in on that style.
For sure. And it feels like, maybe just to me and maybe just because it's so fresh, but this really did feel like he accessed a little bit beyond his normal ability to go crazy. You know what I mean? Like, when he's swinging that axe at the door, like, the guy, he looks fucking crazy. And I know he's supposed to, and I know he always kind of does, but to me, he looked like transcendent beyond the normal insanity he can push himself
like a
to.
rabid animal.
And like you said, Ben,
if you look at that scene, and I just rewatched it recently. That first swing, you can see in his face, he's smiling.
Oh yeah.
And then the second swing, his demeanor changes immediately, and
he's
so
pissed.
It's you see a huge range of emotion in that scene where he's swinging that axe.
For sure, and the way that was shot too, with the camera following.
Oh my god,
the
I
axe.
love it so much.
That's unbelievable. It's really, really fucking cool stuff. In that same scene, we have Shelley Duvall, poor Shelley Duvall, on the other end of the wall there. And despite the fact that the first thing I think of when I think of The Shining is Jack Nicholson, I think Shelley Duvall, like, she really carries this movie because, for the most part, Jack is just kind of off doing his own thing. And that's like the plot of the movie. He's trying to do his own thing. And his damn wife and kids keep bugging him. And this crazy haunted hotel isn't helping either. So we got to talk about Shelley. Not only just her performance, but also kind of what it took to get this performance out of her. And, whether or not it was all worth it or necessary. Because, like I said, for me, this is a Jack Nicholson movie and it's a Kubrick movie, but I don't know. I was surprised for a number of reasons how much I liked her in this movie. And what I mean by that is like, as unfortunate as it is, guys like Kubrick and guys like the guy from the last round we watched, Hitchcock, they're not known for their treatment or reverence for women. And so the fact that Shelley seemed to have a part and a performance that was as important to this movie as it was, honestly sort of surprised me. I just thought she would be the screaming woman on the other side of the axe, which in some ways she was, but I don't know. I just I was really taken with her performance. I could feel her terror, I could feel her worry, I could feel her love for her family. So I want to just talk about that a little bit. And Justin, you're our guest. So let's start with you. What do you think about Shelley Duvall here?
Well, yeah, I think she did a great job. It's, you watch her, and I think it's a fine line between kind of like a hysterical, hysterics of watching that or enduring that, and having it be watchable.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think she did a great job of, balancing that, showing that that true fear, that true terror throughout the film. And she matched Jack, with regards to, his slow descent and her increased awareness of what was happening.
That's a good point.
And it builds evenly and it builds well. And certainly I'm not an actor, but
not with that
I think her
attitude.
ability to match his intensity, his insanity with her fear.
Yeah.
I think she did a great job.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd really, for whatever reason, it hadn't struck me that, you know, she goes from being sort of like annoyed that she has to do this to being like truly terrified. And like, even with her relationship with Danny, you know, it goes from like just general worry about her kid to like an understanding of like, oh shit, like this kid has something that I don't understand. So that's a really good point. And it's a slow burn both ways. And it speaks to Kubrick. What about you, Matt? What do you think about Shelley Duvall here?
So, I mean,
and the treatment of,
I haven't watched the documentary. I know that Kubrick was difficult to work with. Several actors and actresses have said so. Many have, you know, the full spectrum of experiences with them. And so I don't really know the extent, and I don't know specific things that she had to go through with him during the filming of this movie. Ben could probably speak more to that if he chooses to. But I will say that, like, I mean, you take the movie Whiplash and you have, you know, this sort of like genius musician who's like pushing someone to the brink, trying to bring something out of them. And in their own eyes, it justifies the abuse. It justifies all kinds of like bad treatment. And we know, like we've seen it in sports, like really hard coaches, you know, some of the greatest athletes had really tough coaches. And, you know, you see it time and again, and abuse, you know, can be a big motivator sometimes. But in my view, it's never worth it.
Yeah.
And I would take a vanilla performance any day of the week over a terrific performance that took a ton of abuse to get to. As far as her performance in the movie, I know that Stephen King criticized her for being just like a big dummy who just was there to scream. And after my first viewing a few years back, I maybe would agree with that assessment of her. But watching this again, I actually couldn't disagree with it more. Like, one thing about Kubrick, and Hitchcock did this really well, and I feel like these older filmmakers did this way better than today's. She's got her nose in a book at the kitchen table. There's books coming off the shelf at their little house, and you know, Jack talks about her being like a big horror book nut, you know, in the job interview, and so they're establishing her early on. And as the movie progresses, not only is she like, basically she's the one taking care of the hotel while Jack just hangs out and throws tennis balls at the wall. And so
solid scene. Also, the throwing the tennis ball scene. I literally was laughing out loud. It's like, man,
working so hard. Trust the process. But yeah, she's taken on everything. She's taken on this giant hotel. She's taking on being the parent. She's taken on, you know, taking care of Jack as well. And so she's there to basically, you know, be everything for everybody. And so she's the rock of the family in the hotel. And I feel like when it came time for her to become, you know, this screaming, you know, character because a horror has come to life, it's like, but I already kind of knew, like she was seeing the writing on the wall because, you know, she's a horror nut. So I thought her development was cool and interesting. And yeah, I agree. She did outstanding.
Sure.
Yeah, I think she was, I mean, just to echo Tyler's point, like, I mean, you can make the argument that she kind of carried the film. I mean, I know this is like a Jack movie and that's how it gets seen, and I don't disagree with that, but I think it's almost more impressive that she wasn't overshadowed by him, in my opinion. Like, she holds her own with him. I think if you have a wife who, not a wife, but like an actress who can't like carry her weight, you know, with Jack, this just becomes a completely different movie. Whereas you have someone that you can sympathize with, and, you know, you want to win, and you see her kind of like slowly deteriorating as well, just because of her surroundings. But yeah, I think it was great. It's a fine line between like what's worth it for the final product, you know, like watching the behind the scenes. So Kubrick's wife, Vivian, was just shooting behind the scenes stuff, and that's the making of the Shining documentary was by her. And there are some talking head interviews, and Shelley afterwards, you know, it's like, I understand what he was doing. Like, it was awful at the time, you know, but she's like, you don't feel emotions about something that you don't hate. Like, I hated it at the moment, but I also know that that's why the movie is so good.
If it hadn't been for that, you know, volley of ideas and sometimes butting of heads together, it wouldn't have come out as good as it did. And it also helps get the emotion up and the concentration up, because it builds up anger, actually, and you get more out of yourself. And he knew that, and he knew he was getting more out of me by doing that. So it was sort of like a game.
It's a very candid interview, so there's other things that she talks about that, you know, like a PR person wouldn't say, yeah, please talk about this. So it doesn't make, I don't think this was like a thing that they told her to say, because it just felt very honest and real. So with some, you know, hindsight, she was like, okay, yeah, like I get what he was doing. It really sucked at the time, but the movie is so great because I was that, like, you know, crazy.
Yeah.
You know, like doing 35 takes of her like walking or whatever it was, like going back up the stairs, swinging the bat and stuff. And just like, she talked about like having to wake up on Monday, realizing that you just have to cry all day long. And she ended up drinking so much water just to stay hydrated because she ran out of tears. You know, it's like, it's insane. And there's a clip in there behind the scenes where Kubrick tells his wife who's filming, you know, like, don't sympathize with Shelley. And she's like, well, why not? You know, he's like, it doesn't help her at all. You know, it's just like, man, this dude is just like letting her have it. And like, I don't know, like you get the final product. It's like, I get it. Cause Shelley was like amazing, but also like, I don't know, try letting her just act, you know, like maybe don't like put her through the torture, just see if she can do it on her own first. Yeah. But, you know, a lot of actors that have worked with him have said like take 35 is kind of when it starts. Like those first 34 are rehearsal. And that's like kind of when it starts. And it's insane because we hear about directors now that do that. I think the most famous one now is Fincher. We heard, you know, the opening scene of Social Network, they shot 99 times. But having a discussion back and forth is a lot different than like hysterically crying and swinging a bat. Like I guess however many takes they did going up those stairs was the equivalent of walking up the Empire State Building. I'm like, that's crazy to me, you know. And then like, but they both still have to act, you know, and on a much lesser level, I would assume like he kind of treated Jack the same way on certain things where I guess for 2 weeks he only sent Jack like cheese sandwiches, which Jack Nicholson hates, you know. And it's like, yeah, if I got fed, like if someone just sent me like bananas and cottage cheese for 2 weeks, I would lose my mind. I'm like, I don't want to eat this. This is horrible. I hate this. So like, I get it. Like if you're forced to do that, but I think there's something different, you know, about like just the onset kind of torture almost just to get a reaction out of someone. So I loved Shelley's performance. It's another person that Stephen King did not want because he envisioned the mom being like, she was like a blonde cheerleader in high school, has never had to like try for anything. Everything was just handed to her and then gets put in the situation where she has to learn to adapt. And like, yeah, again, that's a different story, obviously, you know, but I think Shelley was great. I hate what it did to her, you know, like she's like kind of out of the scene now, but it was an amazing performance that I think held its own with Jack Nicholson's, which I think is the highest compliment you can give.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree with everything you guys have said. I mean, like I said, I was surprised how important she was to the movie. And, you know, it's hard to say, man. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but, you know, like in the end, he's a guy, Kubrick is a guy with a vision, and you know, the end result, I assume, is the vision he was going for. And it's a vision that, despite the subject matter and the stuff, you know, the stories behind it, I enjoy it. I'm glad that it exists. So it's something that's tough to juggle. And yeah, maybe he could have just and should have just had a little more trust in his talent that they could produce the vision without all that torment and torture.
Yeah.
And, you know, having just come off our Hitchcock round, now we've explored two directors, two incredible auteurs with very specific visions and filmmaking styles. And I want to talk a little bit more about this and the notorious difficulty on set and the way they treated their talent, you know, specifically women or, you know, anyone on set, really. And speaking about The Shining specifically, like we've talked about, it's sort of become the thing of legend. And the way that it all went down on set. And I don't know. I'm curious if it really does, if the ends really do justify the means, because I mean, it kind of does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're 4 people 40 something years later. Again, we'll check that math, and we're still talking about it. And it's something that, having seen it a few days ago, it hasn't left my mind. And it's a piece of art that has influenced artists moving forward and filmmakers moving forward and writers. And it's been referenced and it's been revered and all these things. But despite all that, there was, some truly terrible things behind it. And it's just something that's difficult to wrestle with. And, the movie is truly, like, it feels evil when you're watching it, right? It feels creepy. So it is a strange thing to be so enamored by something that really does seem so dark and twisted. And maybe that's really the only way to get it to feel that dark and twisted. And, maybe that's not true, but we've seen it with, unfortunately, Heath Ledger, like the places he had to take himself to get the performance he got out of the Joker and what ultimately ended up happening to him. But I'm sure there's other examples of actors reaching these depths that didn't have to go through this mental torment. And I don't know. It's just something that I've been wrestling with. If it really does, if the ends really do justify the means, and if maybe there could have been a little more happy and chill, so to speak, on set. And I'm curious, Justin, what do you think about all that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when you look at film, film is the ultimate collaborative art.
Yeah.
You can be a perfectionist, photographer, painter, and you're on your own and you can realize your own vision. And the difficulty with film and, Kubrick or the director's perspective, he can't be on the other side of the camera. So if you look at it from a pure, like, I'm creating a work of art here and I'm trying to realize the potential of my performers and the potential of my vision, you can see, I mean, everything else that goes into it, the set design, the costume design, getting the right angles, he's going to push to get that performance he wants, to make it all worth it, and to give up at that point, I'm sure must be very difficult for a director to say, well, close enough, type thing. Whether it's worth it, I mean, I think I read it was like 127 takes with that baseball bat.
Yeah.
Now there could be a method to his madness. He might have felt that he needed that to get her to that place, but it cuts both ways. He could argue that it took the actor 127 takes, but it also took the director 127 takes to get that performance out. So, to be fair, it could be, you can argue, hey, that's your deficiency as a director.
Sure, it's a good point.
To require that many takes to get that performance out of your actor. So, at the end of the day, everyone has a choice. You can choose to do the movie, you can choose not to do the movie.
It's an interesting angle that I hadn't thought about, where Kubrick may have he may be able to realize vision in a way that a lot of directors can't, but maybe he's actually a shitty director because if the point of a director is to direct your talent to make your, to create your vision. And so maybe he's just a really bad director who's somehow was given the green light to waste that much film and spend as much time and effort because they knew the vision that would be realized would be something worth putting on screen and worth going through all that trouble. But that's a good angle I've never heard before. And it's going to be something that bounces around my head for a while. Ben,
I'd love to sit down with whoever his editor was for this thing, and the person that had to sit through those and view those 127 takes. Right. At some point, you're not going to be able to tell. It's like that, show me 10 of them and tell me the difference.
Sure,
man.
Well, what's that story from Fight Club? They made the guy fall down the stairs like 30 times, and then they ended up using the first take or something. Like, I'd be curious if there was something similar here with The Shining.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, when it comes to the directors, because we have Hitchcock, where we talked about, I think it was North by Northwest, and they cut like 8 seconds, on the cutting room floor, and everything else was used. And that blows my mind. And then we have 120 something takes of the baseball bat scene, and I think in the Guinness book, that scene where Danny is talking to Halloran, like at the, in the kitchen or whatever they did, I believe it's the Guinness World Record, 147 takes they did of that, which is insane.
To a kid.
Yeah. And the guy who was in that, the adult, after this, he went to work with Clint Eastwood, who is notorious for just like one take. He's like, cool, we got it. Let's go.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is all IMDb trivia, so, grain of salt or whatever. But they said like after his first take, like he just kind of went up and hugged Clint. He's like, thank you so much. Like after having to do all these takes with, like, I can't imagine the dynamic of going from one person to someone who's just like, cool. Yeah, we got it. Let's go. Next scene. I think that's great. For me, my feelings on this are that a lot of it comes down to the director doing this to an actor versus an actor doing it to themselves, because we talked before, like Dustin Hoffman staying up for like 48 hours, because he was supposed to look just like really weary and everything, and I forget who he was working opposite. He's like, well, have you tried acting, Yeah. Or we get Nick Cage, who's like very method and went on like a weekend bender, just got completely blitzed and videotaped it all to see what his behavior was like in preparation for leaving Las Vegas. And like, okay, that's great. If that's what you want to do, that's awesome. But there's only so much you can do when you're on set and the director wants to do this. I think that's kind of the big difference here, is like, is the actor signing up for themselves to do it? Like, cool, I'll do the research, whatever. Or do you have someone like Kubrick who doesn't even feel like it starts until take 35? Like, again, referencing this documentary, there's a scene in there where it's, when Jack is trying to go into the bathroom before he starts using the axe. And we see part of the scene, and then they yell cut, and Kubrick's like, I liked a few of the things in there. Those were good. Here's the other ones I want you to work on, So he's like, these 3 things were good. I want you to work on these 2 things. And so it just sounds like that's just kind of his process, over and over again. He's like, all right, now we've got 4, we got 1 more to work on. And like, that's just exhausting. But he also just sounds like a guy who doesn't do rehearsals. He's just like, cool, we're going to film everything, we'll take whatever we can. So
sounds like a guy that was born for digital.
Oh my cinema. God. Yeah. Right. Like this is what he was made for. So yeah, I don't know that. I mean, it's hard for me to sign off on like, yeah, it's cool for the directors to do this, to get their vision. Because I agree. I just think in my mind, it's like, well, maybe just like be a better director up front, because then maybe you don't have to do all those takes. I mean, another one of them, I think it was that scene inside the kitchen where they're talking to each other. And after take 40, the guy's name is Scatman. Yeah. And he just like turned to Kubrick. He's like, what do you want? And it's like, yeah, I think I would feel the same. I think Matt's reference of Whiplash was great, because it's that whole scene of like, you're not my tempo. Like, are you dragging, whatever. It's like, he played it the same every time. And he just told him that he was playing it wrong.
Not quite my tempo.
And that's kind of what it feels like, where you're losing your mind. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm doing what you're telling me to do. Why are we doing this over and over? And that would be exhausting. But at the same time, you're just like, I don't know. It's hard to call him one of the best directors of all time. He is, but his process just seems fucking exhausting. Like, to have to put up with that.
Are incredible.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like
this
getting
is the first
there
time
is just
I've
like,
ever considered him as maybe not a good director, just
a
great filmmaker.
And I mean, Shelley Duvall talked about that as well. She just said like, we both had the same mean in mind, but we just had different ways of getting there.
You appreciate all the pain. I mean, you always dislike whatever the cause is of pain. You always resent it. So I resented Stanley at times because he pushed me, and it hurt. And I resented him for it. I thought, why do you want to do this to me? How can you do this to me? You agonize over it. And it's just a necessary turmoil to get out of it what you want out of it. I mean, we had the same end in mind. It was just that sometimes we differed in our means. And by the end, the means met.
But unfortunately, he's the director, so you're going to take his path. Like, we've got the same destination, but we're getting there different ways. But at some point, it's like, I'm the guy with the camera. You've got to adapt to what I want. And you know, she's like, it's a great movie. We got what he wanted. Like it's really good. We're trying to get there different ways. So
yeah,
I don't know.
What do you think, Matt?
It's similar. Piggybacking off what Ben said, I think there are other means to achieve similar results. I certainly don't justify directors, you know, treating people in a worse way or going through extreme measures to elicit certain performances. I much prefer those performances to come, you know, from the actor themselves, or have them put themselves through something like that. And I feel like today we're hearing more about that, the method acting that, you know, Ben referred to, where they're willing to go through extreme lengths to do their craft. And it's not the director trying to, you know, force them into something. But and like I look at, and I already made the comparison to sports, but one of the big differences between like the greats are like Michael Jordan and Kobe, they had the drive, they had it in them to perform. It wasn't some crazy psycho, you know, making them do things over and over and over again. And I mean, as Americans, we like to, you know, pump our chests in comparison to like some of the other countries that like force their athletes to do things and are very like, I guess, abusive in regards to performances. And I think, I think it's hard to justify that strategy. But at the end of the day, for the type of director that Kubrick was, I mean, they were actors in his painting, you know, like it was his painting. Yeah. They needed to be a certain way, and he was the painter. To some extent, I mean, the actors knew that they were in a Kubrick movie, and I know that they wanted a paycheck. Maybe they didn't know exactly what they were signing up for. But to some extent, they gave, you know, consent to some extent, but I don't think that excuses everything.
I'd be curious to see how his process changed over time, because thinking back to The Killing and Paths of Glory, like when, you know, Kirk Douglas and Kirk Douglas, right? Yeah. And Sterling Hayden are the bigger names than Stanley Kubrick. Like, I don't know that he's putting them through 40 takes. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering when that transition happened to when it's like, oh yeah, I worked with this new director. He was great. To being like, okay, I'm going on a Kubrick film. I've got to be ready to, like, you know, they shot like 6 days a week for 16 hours sometimes, you know, a day. That's exhausting. But I have a hard time believing that young Kubrick was like, all right, Sterling Hayden, we're doing this for the 45th time. He'd be like, no, fuck you, man. Like, we got the shot. Let's move on. Like, I'm too good for this stuff. So I don't know. That was just a random thought I had. Like, when did this transition happen that he became like the Kubrick that we know now?
Like, when did he get his green light? Yeah,
exactly.
Speaking about The Shining specifically, like his method of the, you know, it seemed that he had a clear idea that I'm going to drive my actors legitimately crazy so they look legitimately crazy on screen. And that seems like something like a film student would come up with, right? Like, that seems like something I would have come up with, like, oh, and I know I tried to do this to you at one point, Ben. I wrote a script where you had to run in your boxers through a winter's night in the middle of the night. Luckily for you, that never happened.
Yes.
But you know, it just sounds like some shit. It sounds better on paper than I think it really is. And I would be curious to see the cut of The Shining where that didn't happen. All things the same actors, same location, same time frame, everything. But I would be curious to see what like take 6 looked like.
Yeah, exactly.
For every shot, you know,
if you have like 10 takes at most, what movie could you put together? Like, how different would it be than this one?
Because, you know, he's such a meticulous person. You know that the camera angle didn't change. You know, the lighting was you know, everything was the same except for ostensibly the performance. I have my doubts whether or not the performances were actually better or worse. And I love The Shining. I'm glad that it exists the way that it does. I'm sad for the way that it happened, and I would be curious to see how it could have been different. And you know, maybe it's one of those unfortunate things where something like The Shining had to happen so that it was better going forward, right? And all that to say, like, Shelley Duvall, if you're out there, like and subscribe. We're on your side here. I wish you hadn't have gone through that. I think this is my first experience with you.
Join our Patreon.
Join our Patreon. Truly enjoyed the performance, and I'm sorry that it happened to you. But I think we can. I mean, I think we could spend forever talking about this particular subject, but I want to move on a little bit. And I knew I was going to be the host of this episode, and when I was trying to come up with talking points, I honestly had a pretty hard time. And I'm glad that the episode has gone the way that it has, because I wasn't quite sure, like, what could I even say about this film that hasn't been said. I don't have a way to critique it in a way that like seems poignant or relevant. And I had so many questions. Like, that's all I could think about was like, I have no idea what to even think about this movie. I just have more questions than answers. So for me to come up with prompts seemed, I don't know. It seemed a fool's errand. So I wanted to just open it up. I don't know if you guys have the same problem I do. I just wanted to open it up to each of us to ask one big question if we have one. If you don't, that's totally fine. And I'll start with mine. And I was curious, is the Shine Hereditary? Like we learned from the Scatman that it seemed to be hereditary between him and his mother. And also shout out to Danny and what is it, Carruthers? Is that his name?
The Scatman dude?
Or Halloran, yeah.
Halloran, yeah.
His actual name is Scatman Carruthers, but shout out Danny and Halloran. I loved both of them. Halloran was a source of warmth and levity that I think was dearly needed.
Yeah.
I wrote in my Letterboxd review that I always hate the black man or the black character dying first or being the only character that dies.
Mm-hmm.
It was especially a bummer here. I truly thought he was going to save the day, and he did. But I thought they were all going to get away free and clear. But I guess a movie that promises an axe murderer, someone has to be at the end of that axe, and I'm just sad it was the Scatman. But anyways, I'm curious, like, is the Shine something that's hereditary, or does the hotel impose its shine onto people in the hotel? And like, why only in the winter? Or why was it only Jack? I don't know. I was surprised to see so many ghosts in the movie. I thought the insanity was all in Jack's head,
mm-hmm.
but it seemed that every family member was touched to some degree by, visions and hallucinations or whatever. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about that, Justin? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely interesting when you get into the story, and they refer to the Grady family, previously, but there's obviously families in between,
right?
And so I think the Shine and the madness are kind of are separate. I think that madness of the hotel, I think it Jack was a kind of willing participant in that, a weak character, you say. And I do think the Shine was just just a special gift that Danny had, that Halloran immediately, recognized in him.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doc? Sociables, angle rolls, and 7 kinds of what have you.
What a cool moment, by the way. Like, and what a cool way, because at first you're like, oh shit, Halloran's the bad guy. He can read Danny's mind, but then it flips where he's the one he's our exposition. But yeah, anyways, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I just wanted to note that was like a cool little trick that we got thrown at us with learning about the Shine through Halloran.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that's, necessary for this obviously particular story to work, is, Jack is kind of a willing character to descend in this madness, and you have Danny, who has this ability to sense that something is amiss here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that relationship, in the film is obviously is key.
So you think the hotel has its own supernatural ability that, unfortunately for Jack, he was just more susceptible to?
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at that supernatural, because when you're watching the film, you can't really tell if it's you're watching a supernatural ghost story or if it's just all in Jack's head.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the freezer.
Yeah.
When he gets let out, and then it's kind of, to be honest, for me, that was kind of, looking back at it, obviously not the first time I watched it, but the more you watch it, you're kind of disappointed in that, because I was more interested in this that it was an internal madness, within.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do definitely start seeing that he almost is kind of dragging his family down. Then Shelley's character starts seeing these things at the end more frequently. The ghosts and things like that. So
I think that's the part that surprised me, was the fact that Shelley could see this stuff. And what's her Wendy, Shelley. Because I was like, oh, this is all in Jack's head, and Danny just unfortunately has access to it as well. But then when Shelley could start seeing stuff, I don't know, it just kind of like, it didn't take anything away from me. It just was surprising. I was like, oh, so it's the hotel. It's not just like, it seems like these spirits exist in the hotel, and Danny can just see him, and somehow they attach to Jack, but it seems like Shelley has an attachment to him. I don't know. I just, it's a big old question mark for me. And Matt, I think you had a similar experience there.
Yeah, I wondered it as well. I don't know if it goes into more depth in the book about that type of thing. And also, I don't know, have any of you guys seen Dr. Sleep?
I have not.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to see this first.
Yeah. I wondered if that answered any of that, if it talks more about the shine and what has the shine, what doesn't. But yeah, I perceived that, similar to what Justin said, that the hotel has something of a shine, but also has a separate sort of supernatural thing about it, with these experiences that have happened over time.
Yeah.
Seeing like the concept, like where Stephen King came up with it, I think was really interesting, because he was staying at kind of a big lodge like this as they were closing down. And I guess while they were waiting, he saw a group of nuns checking out and leaving. And his thought process was like, well, what happens when like God leaves this place?
Oh yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's interesting. And he also was working on a different story of a child who had ESP. So then like that kind of became The Shining. And so I had the same thoughts of like, I mean, this is a weird analogy probably, but I mean, I got to think about it with the pandemic, when people weren't going into cities anymore, and all of a sudden animals were like, oh, can we come in here now? Like if people aren't here. And I kind of feel like that, like when the hotel closes down, maybe that's when like the spirits or whatever, just like, cool, now we've only got like 3 people to deal with, and not like people coming
Toy
in
Story
and out.
So ghosts.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, exactly. It's like now they can kind of come out and take control, because I don't know, maybe it's just better for them when there's less people there or something. I have no idea, but just hearing that thought process of like, oh, what happens when like God leaves this hotel? It's like, yeah, it's kind of an interesting idea. Like when whatever's protecting you, so to speak, is gone, what happens then? So I don't know. I think it's and
I think, speaking from personal experience, I live in a city that has a pretty sordid history. There is purported to be plenty of ghosts here in Portland, Oregon. There are tours you can take where you go underneath the city, and there's these tunnels where truly horrible instances of human trafficking happened, dating way back to, Lewis and Clark times. And you can go into some of these buildings and you can feel that history. And it's certainly, for me personally, you can sort of feel that energy, right? Not necessarily in a negative way, but you can just feel the history. You can tell that things have been around a long time. And when things are empty and devoid of other people, living people around you, a lot of times that can feel like sort of a vacuum, and those feelings can be a little bit heavier. So I think you're probably right, Ben. I think the point is there's just less people, there's less life there to push out the dead, so to speak.
Yeah.
And yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Justin, did you have any one big question that you wanted to ask, or that was gnawing at you?
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I went through a couple of viewings of this movie, I think I'm pretty fair, fairly, can watch films with a critical eye. But I'll tell you what, I watched the documentary Room 237, and I mean that's a rabbit hole. If you guys haven't seen,
I almost wanted to watch this more to watch that than to actually watch The Shining.
Because I mean it's really fascinating. I mean it's there's people that have analyzed this film to the nth degree. And, I would love to one day sit down with Kubrick and just ask him, hey, is it everything that everyone says it is?
Yeah.
Hopefully he just says yes, because that's the beauty of The Shining. When you start peeling the layers, and there's just so many different ways to look at it. I mean, you have people saying it's, an allegory for, Native Americans, for the Holocaust, for the Apollo 11, hoax, all these things. And I think it's a beautiful film from that regard. And Kubrick, he's so deliberate,
right?
And I think at sometimes, maybe this film, at some point you kind of feel like he's playing with you,
right?
And it's great because The Shining is about this man losing his mind, going through this, and as a viewer, the more you watch this thing and try to read into everything, you kind of go along with that as well, and you're like, I'm losing my mind.
Yeah.
Trying to follow this thing. So that would be my one big question for him, to say, hey, what were you doing here?
I had the same, so like along the lines of him being so meticulous, like there's not a shot in this movie where he didn't control everything within the frame. And it was sort of like when I would see Danny in his sweaters, first of all, those sweaters are incredible. The Mickey Mouse sweater, the Apollo 11 sweater.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think, when you say that, and when I think about it, I noticed those things and I laughed about it. But, he's not just letting some costume designer throw a sweater on Danny. Like, it's obvious that had to be approved. And like that if Kubrick wasn't okay with it, it wasn't going to happen. And did it mean anything? Does Kubrick just like Disneyland and space exploration? So he's like, yeah, a kid would wear that. Did it just make sense to Kubrick, or did it mean something? I think I'm excited to check out that documentary for that reason.
And I mean, it would just be cool. I mean, because we had the benefit of being able to watch this thing over and over, but Kubrick is building something at a time where you may say, hey, how many times are people going to watch this thing?
Yeah.
And he builds so many things. It's almost like he's counting on like a subconscious type saturation of every little, continuity, quote unquote, error or change that he's making. Either he has a lot of faith in the viewer, or he just has that vision where he knows, hey, people are going to be able to, they're going to go back and they're going to watch this over and over again. And they're going to find these things as long as I put them in there.
Something tells me it was more like, I'm going to put them in there regardless if they get it or not. Because there's no way he could have seen the ubiquity of like streaming video or even VHS or DVD, or maybe he did, maybe he's some savant and he's some, fortune teller. I mean, he's obviously got vision, and maybe his vision extends to the future as well. Ben, I think I cut you off there. What were you going to say?
No, I mean, nothing. I was just going to kind of tie that into my question too, because, there's like this scene in there where Shelley Duvall is looking down the hallway and you see the guy in the dog suit, and then like the host sits up from the bed, zero context. It's not explored anymore or anything. It's just like, okay, that happened. And then that's it. It's nothing. But I guess in the book, it's defined as like the host or the maitre d' is having a homosexual relationship with a man who's dressed up as a dog, and they explore it some more, but he just decided like, you know what? I'm just going to throw this in there for no reason. The people who have read the book will get the reference. And if they haven't, then it's just a weird thing, but that's fine. Cause this is The Shining, and you would just see weird stuff like this. Like, the young naked woman who comes out of the tub, and then all of a sudden you open your eyes and it is a decaying old woman that you're kissing. It's like, there are just things that happen here that don't necessarily have like any rhyme or reason. But I kind of wanted to tie that into my question, because we've obviously talked about it so much. And I think this is one of the most notorious cases of the author of the source material just vehemently like hating what was created, from it in the film.
Did you like Kubrick's film of The Shining?
No.
And I'm someone, I've talked about it on here before. one of my least favorite things ever to hear people say is that the book was better. It's like, yeah, no shit, man. Like you have like so much more room in a book to give people's like inner dialogue and to define things more because you're not on a time constraint. Like you can just have a super long book and that's fine. And that's immersive and that's amazing. You know, there's a reason that the first few seasons of Game of Thrones is so great because they could like tell it over multiple hours. You know, they have these books, whereas now you just like, if you have one book, you're going to get one movie from it. And you just can't fit it all in, you know, like I had a film teacher who just said like, that's the most annoying thing to hear someone say. Cause like, yeah, obviously not. But what we saw was this one person's interpretation of the source material. That's it. You know what I mean? So like, I don't know. The thing that comes to my mind is like all the Harry Potters because J.K. Rowling, you know, kind of helped with the screenplays. But when it came to Prisoner of Azkaban, like we got to see Alfonso Cuarón's version of that movie, which I loved, you know, and he got to put some flair in there from like his like Mexican heritage is sprinkled in there. And I think that's awesome. You have stuff like Fight Club, you know, which I never know how to say the author's name. Chuck, what is it?
Palahniuk.
Yep. That guy. But he even said like, oh, the movie hit the topics better than the book did. Like he loves the movie. So I don't know. I guess I just kind of wonder, like, obviously my feelings are out there on what I think about when people say, you know, the book was better. But I'm kind of curious on what we all think about, like, how true to the source material do you think people have to stay? You know what I mean? Like, if the author, should they be doing all these screenplays for the adaptation? Or is it kind of like, once the rights are bought, it's like, cool, do whatever you want with it. This is your thing. I was just kind of curious, I guess, what people's thoughts are on that, because that's always a topic and things are constantly getting adapted. And I just feel like that's something that always comes up. You know, I remember leaving Harry Potter screenings for Goblet of Fire, and the person we were with was so mad. I'm like, dude, that book is like 400, whatever, 700 pages long. It's like they were never going to fit that into 2 hours. It's just impossible. And I don't know, it's a really wide open-ended question, but it's just a conversation I wanted to have because it's something that I feel pretty passionate about. And this seems to be such a great example of such a divisiveness between the author and the director of the film. Yeah. And I don't know how to put that out there as a question.
Yeah, no, like, I used to care more about adaptations, like probably as a teenager, like when a adolescent, or what do you call it, young adult fiction, adolescent fiction. When a young adult novel would be adapted, you'd be like, oh, this is nothing like the book, or they left out this scene. And you're disappointed. And I think like that disappointment and the need to compare just comes from the love of the source material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's no like getting away from that until you can I feel like you have to understand, kind of like you referred to, Ben, like you have to understand the medium that it's being told in. Like if they wanted to create the book, they would just give you the book. Yeah. But film is just like a completely different experience. And it's the same with comic books. Like comic books aren't movies and they aren't books for a reason. They're comic books because that's the medium that it's in. And when you adapt it to film, it has to be a film. And so I've learned to appreciate them as completely separate things. And, you know, if they accurately depict your favorite scene from the book, you know, that gives the bonus points. But for the most part, once it's given to someone for the project, I feel like it becomes their voice telling the story. And so, I mean, we talked about Ready Player One earlier on. And a lot of people were upset about that movie not being like the book. And to me, like, I thought it was a great Spielberg movie. Like I wasn't looking for a, you know, word for word adaptation of the book, but it became a Spielberg movie the second he became attached to the project. And I think The Shining was very much that way with Kubrick. And to go along with the previous question, I feel like with Kubrick, aesthetic is like such a big deal. Like there may be things that he's trying to tell that are like aha Easter eggs spread throughout, but I feel like similar to like Wes Anderson, he might have a painting on the wall just because that painting elicits a certain feeling that he wants the audience to feel just in that setting. And he's particular that way. And so it might not be like, oh, that's supposed to be in reference to this other thing. And maybe it is, but maybe it's just, oh, this makes the audience feel kind of uneasy in the scene. So that's why the painting's there. And so I think once this was picked up by Kubrick it became a Kubrick film and it ceased to be a Stephen King novel.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of echoes my thoughts on this topic exactly. I remember, I think it's well documented on this pod that I'm a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings films, specifically the Lord of the Rings. I haven't actually seen The Hobbit, but I remember I had read the Lord of the Rings and all that when I was younger. And when I came out of the movie, I remember hearing some true Lord of the Rings fans complaining about the adaptation on film. And for me, I just was like, what do we mean by it's better? Right? Like they're two separate things. And so like when you say the book is better, do you just mean it just had more detail in it? Because like we've talked about, of course it did.
Yeah.
You can fit like a screenplay. How long is a typical screenplay? How many pages is a typical screenplay for a movie? Like
I think it's usually like a page a minute.
Right.
That's kind of the average.
And like on those pages, we have descriptions of the scene and the blocking, and they talk, you'll usually describe transitions and all these sorts of things that you're seeing on screen. So there's more words than there even is film, right? Even in a screenplay. So like in a book, you're obviously going to have so much more opportunity to describe and detail and go all these sorts of different places. But in a film, it's like you have 90 minutes or 2 hours or 3 hours or however long it is. You have a finite amount of time and only so much amount that you can show. And so does that mean that it's not as good as the movie? Because like we've talked about, we saw Jurassic Park in the theater, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And I've seen I've read the book Jurassic Park, and there are scenes in that book that don't end up in the movie. And you could argue like, oh, the book is better because there's so many cool scenes in that book that aren't in the movie. But I will watch Jurassic Park 1,000 times before I ever read that book again. And I enjoyed the book.
Yeah.
So like the movie, despite not having quite as much, is better in my opinion. And I would say the same thing for the Lord of the Rings, and I'll probably get killed there by Lord of the Rings purists, but
send your hate mail to Tyler.
I will watch all 3 extended versions again 1,000 times before I ever read those books again. And it's not that the books aren't as good. To me, they're equally as good, but like, I don't know. I feel like you have to separate the two. And to say it's better, like if it's truly a shitty movie, then sure, the books are better than the movie. But like, there are times when they are at least equal, and if not balanced the other direction, where the movie is better than the book. Like I'll say with Jurassic Park, for instance, like nothing against Michael Crichton. I've actually read a number of his books and I enjoyed them, but like I will always watch the movie before I read the book again. And so I just think like you have to separate the two. No matter
That's how I am with Holes.
Yeah. And I've only ever seen the movie. I've never seen the book. And I think we talked about this. Speaking of Stephen King, I'm a big fan of, he has a series of novels called The Gunslinger, or the Dark Tower series, and it follows a gunslinger chasing the Man in Black. And if you've read the book, you could understand it's sort of King's version of The Lord of the Rings. And I just know that any movie is going to be bad, and like probably because there's just no way that they can fit everything into a movie, and so it's just not going to work. So to compare the two is just not even fair. And I've rambled on for far too long here, and I want to hear what Justin has to say about it. But I just don't think that it's a fair comparison. But I'm curious what Justin thinks.
No, I think Matt hit it on the head with regards to, you have to respect the medium and understand what the capabilities and the limitations are of it, for sure. I think a lot of times when people get into it, it's how they connected with it. Whether the emotions or the experience they had when they read the book, versus what they saw in the movie, can elicit that type of reaction. Yeah. And, Jurassic Park is a great example. Reading it is one thing, but in that context, especially at that age, if you guys were like me and as a kid, you just loved dinosaurs, and you always wanted to be able to see one. Just wanted, you would have done anything to be able to see one.
Right.
And in that movie, that's why that I'm with Tyler there. You're always gonna, that scene when they're in the Jeep and they see the whatever Brachiosaurus for the first time. I mean, connected with that moment, more so than reading about it in the novel, which I read the book as well. So I think there's certain books, that are going to do a better job at that, with regards to maybe the internal dialogue of a character, and as you're reading it, if it's character driven, as opposed to maybe a movie that is more plot driven or more action oriented, or something where it's kind of being able to take basically put a picture to the description in the book. So I can see how some people would gravitate towards that. But yeah, to be able to call them, to try to compare them as apples to apples, that's going to be hard. I think you'll always be a losing argument. You have to just respect, hey, they're different, and you're going to get different things from them.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. 100%. Like, you just, I don't know. I just don't think you can, I don't think it's a fair comparison. Even with the Game of Thrones, I hated season 8 with a pure hatred. Like, it bummed me out so much. And there was no source material for it. So I think you could make the argument that, like, maybe a movie doesn't follow the source. With the Dark Tower example I gave, there was a movie with Idris Elba that was very loosely based on the source material. I didn't even watch it because I knew it wasn't going to be what I wanted, and it didn't seem like it was very good to begin with. So I think as long as, like, someone makes an effort to create a piece of art based on the source material that honors it in the best possible way, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same, and whether or not it's better, I guess, is up for you to decide. But when people say it's better, I'm always curious, what do they actually mean? Is it just more thorough, or is it actually better? Unless you guys have anything else you want to talk about, I think we can wrap up here. We've taken up plenty of our esteemed guests' time. I know it's getting late there in Salt Lake City. So if you guys have anything else you want to add, go ahead, feel free to stop me. But otherwise, thank you to whoever you are out there listening to us on Spotify, watching us on YouTube, or wherever else you find us. We really appreciate you being here. We truly want this to be a collaborative experience and a real movie club. I know personally, I was looking over my Letterboxd diary of films I've watched over the past few years, and I can honestly say, like, I wouldn't have seen any of it without this club. So without Ben, Matt, and people like Justin, it's really been it's really been a blast for me, and it's something I've really treasured, and it means a lot to me. So if you're here participating with us, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. And I imagine that Ben and Matt and Justin feel the same way. Make sure you tell your friends about it if you're enjoying it. Shoot us a review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your parents, tell your kids, whoever you want to tell about, whoever you think would appreciate this, pass it on to them, and we sure would appreciate them. And Justin, thanks again so much for joining us. You've been one of our longest standing supporters. So I don't know, do you have anything you want to promote? Any websites or social medias or anything?
No, I'm good. I appreciate the opportunity to get on here and talk with you guys. I enjoy talking about film, and yeah, it's great to kind of hear other people's perspectives and point of view. And I learned a lot. So yeah, it's a good time.
Absolutely. Well, I truly hope you'll come back. I'm sure you've seen the schedule. You have our contact information. So if you want to come back for anything, I truly hope you do. And I'll leave it at that, and we'll sign off from here. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
See ya.
This is less encouraging.
What do you think, Marge? All I need is a title. I was thinking along the lines of No TV and No Beer Make Homer something.
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!